Our next speaker is Alaa Alasfour from Northeastern Illinois University, and the title of her talk is Code Switching in Computer-Mediated Discourse, the Case of Instagram.
Right. Hi, everybody. My presentation is about code switching in computer-mediated discourse, the case of Instagram. But before starting my presentation, I want to share some information with you about some statistics about Instagram. It was launched in October 2010, and now there are 200 million active users for Instagram, and it was acquired by Facebook in 2012 for approximately $1 billion. These huge numbers, I mean, indicate something. Indicate that social networks are gaining more power and control over our lives, and that that should be reflected, and that should be given more consideration and attention in our academic research and studies. Actually, in my paper, I investigated Arabic-English code switching practices by Saudi female Instagrammers, and I examined basically frequency of code switching, types of code switching, preferred spaces, triggers, pragmatic and social functions, attitudes towards code switching. Now we'll go over some background or literature review about code switching. Code switching has been defined as the practice of alternately using two languages, and here we come to the question. What's the difference between code switching and code mixing? Actually, in my study or in my analysis, I used code switching without making any distinction between code mixing and code switching. Now, what are the types of code switching that are relevant to my analysis? I actually was concerned about intrasentential, which pertains to switches within a clause involving a phrase, a single word, or across morpheme boundaries, and intersentential, which includes switches at sentence and clause boundaries. The question is code switching intentional or unintentional? I believe that in spoken discourse, it's mostly unintentional, and it's the result of psycho and sociolinguistic factors. And in spoken discourse, yes, it's intentional. And that's what I will argue, that's what I found in my data. Code switching and social functions. Actually, in spoken context, we have different studies about social functions, such as Gumbers and Groget, but in written context, we have fewer than in spoken context. Mahutian proposed the resource and repertoire approach, and which accounted for code switching in written medium, and she identified different functions such as political statement of defiance, a call for globalization, deteriorating of identity, shift in social status and power, and symbol of ethnicity. What concerns us here, what's more important, is code switching in in computer-mediated discourse or in social networks. I found an interesting study which was done by Lee and Barton, in which they investigated Flickr, and they found different motivations for code switching, such as translating content for imagined audience, widening participation on Flickr, this is wrong, not Twitter, socializing with local and global audience, positioning the self and others. Attitudes towards code switching, attitudes basically are, varied, and they are unpredictable, and they are either negative, positive, or neutral. Web 2, Herring actually provided a definition for Web 2. It's web-based platforms that emerged as popular in the first decade of the 21st century and that incorporate user-generated content and social interaction, often alongside or in response to structures and or multimedia content provided by the sites themselves. Examples are Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, and of course Instagram. Also, Herring provided definition for computer-mediated discourse. It's a text-based human-human interaction mediated by network computers or mobile telephony, provides an abundance of data on human behavior and language use. Actually, I used the faceted classification scheme, and it was proposed also by Herring, in which he assumes that computer-mediated discourse is subject to basic types of influence, and these influences sometimes are related to medium, and we have different categories for medium, such as synchronicity, message transmission, persistence of transcription, etc. Applying this approach to Instagram, I found that Instagram was asynchronous, which means that users have to log on in order to receive messages. It's also one-way transmission, which means that they are users cannot see the other users' messages unless they receive them. Persistent messages, which means that the messages stay at the system, and this actually affects the metalinguistic awareness of the users. Visual and audio channels, private and public messages, this is very important in our data. Anonymous and real names, it allows for anonymous and real names. It also provides filtering service. My methodology, actually I used an online self-report questionnaire. I designed it through surveymonkey.com, and the online questionnaire, I put it in my personal account or profile on Instagram. It was answered by 62 Saudi female Instagrammers. The questionnaire was written in Arabic. It included 7 close-ended questions, and I provided a space for other comments. And also, more than one option was allowed in the answers. Frequency of code switching, that was the first aspect that I was investigating. The question was, do you use English language in your personal profile on Instagram? And 70% of the participants preferred yes, either usually or sometimes, and while 53, they don't know. They don't use it, sorry. The result here shows that code switching in English among those users, Saudi female Instagrammers, is common, and it's usually intentional, and that's why no one took the answer I don't know, or the option I don't know. So I guess this is intentional, and they are aware, they are consciously aware when they are making code switching or not. English also is the preferred language in CMD, and this is very common. English is the lingua franca of the internet, and I found very interesting quote from Bahati and Richie. It was about the statistics about English use in internet. The second aspect that I was investigating was types of code switching. The question was, how do you use English in your profile? And you see here the result, 40% preferred whole sentences, and almost 35 single words, while almost less than 20 as a translation for Arabic text. This indicates actually that intersentential code switching occurs more than intrasentential, and intersentential actually code switching is a possible indicator of the level of competence. Actually, intersentential, I mean switching between sentences is less complicated, less complex, and therefore it entails or requires less level of competence. And finally, using both languages separately is common in computer-mediated discourse, as we saw here, as a translation for Arabic text. So providing both languages is really common. Here we see the spaces for code switching, and we have actually investigated different spaces for code switching, and social networks usually assign different spaces for writing text. And here we have the bio and the titles, descriptions, tags, and also hashtags. My question was, where do you use English language in your profile in Instagram? And you see here there's no, much distinction between them except for the titles and descriptions of photos. Social functions of code switching. This is the most important part for me. Actually, code switching, I believe that code switching in CMD shares some functions with code switching in spoken discourse, yet it evokes new functions which correspond to the new nature of the platform. And in this, I investigated different, 10 minutes? Okay. I investigated different functions, raising the status of the writer, reflecting the educational level, socializing with the global audience, widening the participation in Instagram, using English as a resource to express some concepts. So we see here different social functions that some of them are related or more common in spoken discourse, and some of them are new functions. Here's a surprising, results. You see here, it expresses my meaning better than Arabic was preferred by almost 50%, and the others, are equal. So this is what I mean by using English as a resource. So using English as a resource to express concepts which are associated with English culture, these those concepts which are more associated to English culture, and those concepts are more accessible in English than in Arabic. And that was supported by other comments which, other comments for the participants, such as some meanings are better expressed in English sentences than in Arabic ones, and the other two quotations or comments. Social functions of code switching. Also, we have at the second place prestige function, and this also points out to the additive value of English. Non-Arab followers and attracting global followers are new functions for code switching, and they are, I think, the result of having an Instagram as a private and public platform that we talked about in Herring's model. Other functions which were provided or written by the participants, I use it for joking and making fun only. I'm studying abroad and I need to practice English language. And the last, or the one before, or the fifth question here about the triggers. What are the topics that increase the chance of writing in English? And surprisingly, traveling is the most chosen trigger, and then comes emotions and technology. Traveling actually, traveling was chosen, I think, because English is the lingua franca of global business and tourism. So when you go for traveling, you communicate in English, and that's why they use it as a comment or as a description for their photos, and to add a sense of authenticity also. Emotions, which is the most interesting part, because most studies reported that emotions rarely expressed in the second language, and they are mostly expressed in the first language. I think that emotions, I attributed that to different reasons. The first one is the asynchronous nature of the Instagram, which allows the users to have more time to reflect, to choose the words, so it's not like chatting or like spoken discourse. The other one is the nature of the two languages. Actually, this was suggested by one of the comments that was saying Arabic English sounds more romantic than Arabic in terms of expressing emotions, and that was shocking for me. The third one was expressing emotions in both languages. Actually, in a society like Saudi Arabia, which is conservative. People tend not to reveal their emotions and their social, their personal emotions and life. And I think that makes emotions, or emotional expressions, more accessible and more acceptable to be in English than to be in Arabic. Technology was reported in several studies, and that's not, surprising. The sixth question was about the attitudes. What's your attitude towards using English language in social networks? And 40% chose neutral, and objecting almost 35, encouraging almost 25. The seventh question, do you think that using English language in social networks is threatening Arabic language? This is also further investigation. I wanted to know if they have this sense of threat. And surprisingly, yes. 45, yes, largely, and almost 30, yes, limitedly. And that's surprising, actually. And we have here a sense, we have contradiction between the attitudes. The majority have neutral attitude. At the same time, they think that English is threatening Arabic. And that needs, more investigation and more studies. The conclusion here, code switching in Instagram is intentional. Intersentential code switching occurs more than intrasentential, or it's more preferred than intrasentential, and that would be a possible indicator of the level of competence. Using English as a resource to express some concept was the most preferred social function. Code switching is mostly triggered by topics related to traveling, then emotions and technology. The overall attitudes towards code switching are neutral, despite that the majority think that English is threatening Arabic. You may agree with this quote or not, but our social tools are not an improvement to modern society. They are a challenge to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alaa. We have 13 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. Actually, my question concerns your questions about thing. To me, it seemed like, except for your second question, the others did not actually, they were so broad, did not actually elicit anything about code switching. If we go back to your questions, like about frequency, your question is, based on the definition you gave for the first question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, based on the definition you gave for code switching, okay, we need to switch either intrasententially or intersententially, right? But your question is, do you use English language in your personal profile and Instagram? So this does not, to me, it's so broad, it is not eliciting anything about code switching. You know, there is this matrix language, and then there is a switch, you know, either intrasententially or intersententially. But this one is so broad, this cannot actually, to me, this cannot, you know, give you any insights about...
Okay, do you mean the first or the second question? No, I'm sorry.
I said, except for your second question, which is directly, no, not even this one.
This is about intrasentential and intersentential code switching. The first one was about the frequency, if they are using English frequently or not.
I know, but for this question, okay, this one is saying yes for question 2. Whole sentence or completely. Okay, this one gives you some ideas about, you know, whether or not they use it intrasententially or intersententially. But the other questions you have are so broad. You know, for instance, do you use English? Maybe I use monolingually. You know what I mean? I use English and I don't code switch. Or question 3, 4, 5, they were like that. I don't know.
Actually,
yeah, it's like language choice rather than
yeah, the problem here, thank you for your question, but the problem here that we don't have, I mean, a term for code switching in Arabic. That's why I used language use, I mean, using English language. And that's, I mean, yeah, I agree with you that it makes a sense of, I mean, it's, I mean, broader, but what can I do? I mean, I don't have equivalent, so, yeah.
Maybe I don't know, add a phrase or two, like, do you insert some English words, or do you change from one language to another, so that instead of code switch, you could say shift from one language to another, so that the conclusions that you're trying to draw are valid with respect to code switching. Yeah, you have got lots of good, you know, data, but I'm not sure if this is about code switching or just code choice.
Yeah, I see that. Actually, I may think about that. I will take it into consideration, and I will see if I can, I mean, narrow down my questions and make them more, I mean, specific, as you suggested. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the location of the subjects, and at least one comment mentioned studying abroad. And I'm wondering how many of your subjects were actually in English-speaking countries at the time that they took this survey, and did that affect, versus Arabic-speaking countries, would that affect their use of English?
Yeah. This is actually an important question, because I found almost 6 to 7 of them were in American, I mean, America, and some of them are in the United Kingdom. So, yeah, I should make distinction between the two results. I mean, based on two groups: the group that's in Saudi Arabia and the group that are studying abroad. So this is a good remark and a good comment. Thank you.
I just wondered, you're asking for self-reported data, how much people think they use English. I'm wondering if you can speculate on how correlated this is with how much they actually use English, or if you're currently investigating any of their actual, you know, doing any natural language processing on what they actually wrote.
Actually, maybe I carried that out in further research. And you mean to investigate their language? I mean, naturally, I mean, in everyday life?
I just mean, no, I mean on Instagram, you've asked them these questions, how often do you use English? And maybe they say, oh, a lot or a little or something like that.
See how
have you measured those same people's Instagram accounts?
No, actually.
Because that would also be interesting to see
right.
how those compare. They might be the same or might be different.
Yeah, right.
So I had two questions. The first is just a clarification one. So were all of these radio button questions, or were they check all that apply?
Check all that apply.
Okay, so all of them would check all that apply? Okay. And then my other question had to do with, so because Arabic and English use different writing systems.
Right.
And so one question is, how much do you get using using the Arabic script to write some, transliterate some English words in it, versus using the Latin script? And then with the issue of right, English is generally written left to right, and the other is right to Arabic is right to left, right?
Arabic from right to left.
So does that create issues with intersentential code switching if you switch between scripts?
Actually, that doesn't make, I mean, a difference. I mean, you mean in writing, right?
Yeah, so like if you're writing like, okay, let's start the sentence in Arabic, then use some English with the Latin script, then maybe go back to Arabic. You would have the two scripts generally.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible.
Okay, so that is common then?
Yeah, it's common.
Okay.
It's very common.
Okay. Oh yeah. I have experience with doing that, but always with languages where both scripts are in the same direction.
Yeah, that's pretty easy actually.
I guess related to that, I had a question about hashtags, because you were saying, did you see that people were saying that they were using English more with hashtags? So I was thinking maybe, because I know on Instagram or on Twitter, when you do a hashtag, it'll sort of highlight it, and that becomes something that people can look up. So when you're writing it in a different script, does it have that same function? Does Instagram recognize it as a tag and that people can access?
Yeah,
it does?
definitely.
Okay,
yeah. Even in Arabic, we have hashtags in Arabic.
Right. So people do actually do hashtag, and they'll write something.
Right. Yeah.
I was just curious
they do.
about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation, but my question is, I have a comment and a question. Code switching and code shifting are actually linguistic descriptors. They describe the linguistic competence of the bilinguals. So a person who's bilingual, speaks two languages, he is sometimes making code switching and code shifting. Code switching is within the same language. It may happen even within English when you switch from one level of speaking to another level, from vernacular to standard to substandard. So this is my comment. So I don't see the use of Arabic and English in Instagram as code switching. It's rather, I'd agree with the opinion that it's a matter of linguistic choice. I choose to use either this language or that language because it has nothing to do with the competence. You're not measuring the competence of the person. Is he competent enough to shift or switch from one code to another? So it's a matter of linguistic choice. I may be trilingual, or a person who speaks 4 languages, and I may just choose to write my comment in any of these languages. My specific question is, I did not see very specific questions in your study that will tell us that this person is, because of his competence or her competence, she or he is using Arabic and English simultaneously for a communicative purpose that cannot be communicated in one language other than the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, this is my assumption, and as you know, maybe in Saudi Arabia, English is taught as a second language, not as a first language. And my assumption is that maybe switching between words is more complicated and more complex than switching between sentences, because it requires that level of syntax. I mean, knowing the syntax and morphology of both languages, that makes it a little bit complex and complicated. And this is my assumption, that maybe this is an indicator of their level of competence. I mean, that needs more, investigation. These are just assumptions.
I had a question as well about that, because it would be interesting to look whether their self-reported maybe use of English and self-reported proficiency of English may also correlate with their use of English. And I have a hypothesis that it might not happen, because coming from a country in which we are supposed to learn English in high school, but then we don't use it at all as spoken, but then we like to use it in Facebook or in social networks and in specific functions. Sometimes we just have one word here, but that doesn't mean that we are competent in the language, right? Mm-hmm. That we are competent to a certain level and we carry certain function. So it would be like the functional use of English without requiring to have a competence. And this is something that, this is something that I see around. It certainly has not been studied. Christina is going to study it, right? But it's something that I think it's also interesting to see that sometimes we assume that code switching requires a lot of competence, and maybe social networks shows us that we might not need that much competence, but only certain functional competencies of what it means. And I think that would be interesting to see. I don't know how English is spoken in Saudi Arabia. I'm talking from the Spanish perspective, from the young Spanish population. So just
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I may do more investigation and more study in this specific topic, and see, as you said, how using one word maybe serves different functions or not.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting. And in line with the comments before me, I was wondering if at the beginning of this study when the sample was selected, I wonder if it was split initially into rough categories of language proficiency. As somebody said, obviously when somebody's bilingual or almost native in fluency, the rate at which they're going to be using English can be higher. So I was just wondering if these categories have been evened out, for instance, 25%, 25, 25, 25, you know what I'm saying? It might be useful, it might show some interesting correlations. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I started to measure out. I mean, just to have a sense about the situation or the attitudes and the practice, and that, as you said, yeah, needs more investigation and needs more to be specific and more narrowed down questions. Thank you.
So.